This Boris Effects webinar replay is brought to you by our technology partners, Dell, NVIDIA, and Intel.
All right, so the Gmask Tracer, I just want to talk about it really quick before we hop into anything else, but that is a new feature that a lot of people asked for, and the nice thing about it is it exports your data with the tracking info and the masks separately, and that's something that we've engineered specifically, honestly, by user request from our Flame users, and we worked to cram it into this release, and it's actually, I'm pretty pleased with it as far as how it works.
Yeah, the Gmask Tracer is a great format for Autodesk Flame, and they've been updating it quite a lot in the last 2 years. Autodesk is doing some very cool things with AI inside of their Roto format. So it's great that we have this new format for those users.
So yeah, and let's dive into how this works. So this shot, I actually I added new graffiti on the wall that Ross is gonna love because it's his favorite, is unicorns. And
Very
so
nice,
I've
Mary.
added some. Thank you. I knew you would get a kick out of that. Anyway, I wanted to add some new graffiti on its wall because, let's say we have graffiti that we have to cover up for rights purposes or whatever. We can put something new on top of it. This is actually using something that we have worked on for a while now, and it is an updated perspective shift tracker. So it's part of our planar tracker, but as you guys might know, if you've used Mocha for a long time, sometimes when objects moved too far into perspective, you'd see the surface tool and shape tool collapse in on itself. And that was because we had this problem where the surface would go behind the camera because of how Mocha was doing the math for this shot. Now, in order to correct this, we've actually changed a little bit of the way that Mocha thinks. And our engineers did a really good job with that. And let's talk a little bit about how that works. And I'll show you right here inside of our shot. Let's go back to our selected layer here. Yeah, very good. All right, so if we want to track this wall, for example, what we would do normally is we would do the link to track none trick, and that's a pretty cool trick for those of you that have never used Mocha before. When you track in Mocha, I'm just going to really quickly cover the basics here. When you track in Mocha, the surface tool is what the track is doing, and the shape is where the track is looking, and they're separate from one another, okay? And we're just going to give you a little remedial on this really quick, so stay tuned if you have used Mocha before and this is old hat to you. But one of the things about this is, translation is really obvious, okay? Scale, super obvious, and rotation, again, super obvious, all right? Shear and perspective are different. So shear is a warp in X and Y, and then perspective is the addition of Z space. And have you guys ever seen your shape just sort of do this? That's what we fixed by using this new perspective algorithm. So what we're doing here is we are tracking this shape, and then the surface tool is what our track is doing. And because we've gone to link to track, the track is normally linked to itself, so the surface tool is a child of the track, etc. When we unlink the track from itself, what we're doing is we're telling the shape to stay in one place and not follow the track. Otherwise, the shape follows the track by default. When we tell the shape not to follow the track, we read all the pixels that move underneath like a scanner. So what we end up with is, if you watch our surface tool, you can see our surface tool is moving, but our shape is not. And that's because this is what the track is doing. And again, this is where the track is looking. We track 5 different parameters: translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. And that perspective is what in the past was a little bit tricky, and we have fixed that problem now, or at least we've made it a lot less prevalent. Okay. Minimum percent of pixels used is your accuracy in your track. So it's going to look for 90% of the pixels inside of this shape and then move on to the next one when it finds them. And then you can increase angle and zoom and your search area if you're not having a very good track. Large motion is your basic track. Small motion is for what we call sub-pixel motion, which is like, think of it as half pixel motion. Your camera's on a tripod and the wind is blowing past, that kind of movement. And then manual track is for manually moving your track. And I'm going to show you what that looks like really quick, just so you know. All right, so here's our surface tool. You notice how it's blue. We're going to turn it to manual track. Notice how it's dotted. And if I need to get past an occlusion, I can simply move my surface tool, and my track now animates between those 2 points. So that's manual tracking. It's literally hand tracking. That's going to be used for any time you have like laptops closing, faces turning completely away from you, total occlusions, a person walking completely in front of your object, that kind of thing.
And let's make sure people are aware, Mary, that manual track definitely you kind of use it as a sort of like a last resort, or really to fix untrackable things. You don't really, it's very rare that you would start with manual track, because you're gonna add keyframes all over the place.
100%. And also, while you're in manual track, you can still track 1 or 2 frames at a time, and then you can correct wherever Mocha is not nailing the track. So, you know, it's a really good way to finesse a track, especially when you're going into an occlusion. So let's say this girl was walking over a screen. If she completely covered that screen, we want to start tracking manual tracking from that side and that side, right? And then what we'd end up doing is we'd end up correcting whatever Mocha couldn't do. So, all right. Let's talk making this work as an insert. So you can take this data out of Mocha Pro and you can export it in a couple of different ways. This is not new. This is just, I just want you guys to know. You can export your tracking data as an After Effects CC Power Pin, which was new in 2020, and it's a really great tool. But we also have corner pins and transform data for After Effects. We have all kinds of exports for all sorts of programs, including, you know, Flame, Fusion, Avid tracking data, DS tracking data. We have the Boris effects tracking data, so that you can get this data into other Boris effects tools. You can get it into Final Cut, not 10, but anything younger than that. And then you can also, older than that, and you can get it into Hit Film, Mocha Blend, Motion, Nuke, and even Quantel. So, and of course, you can export stuff into Silhouette. You can export our shape data into Premiere, Fusion. Obviously, there's our Gmask Flame Tracer that we talked about. We can do Hit Films, which is a really great sort of prosumer product. After Effects, Final Cut, Mocha Blend, which is a third-party program for getting our data into 3D programs like Maya. And then we have Nuke and Shake and Silhouette. So we can export this data into all sorts of platforms, but because this is a plugin, we can do even more stuff with this. So we can apply this as an insert. So what I've done here is I have selected insert layer as the insert that I want to put in this corner pin. And what's cool about this is wherever I put this surface tool, you see it's live right here on my screen, and I can move it however I like. That's really handy when you're trying to fix the placement of an object. Okay, in our insert, we can say, hey, I want you to render this with motion blur, and I want you to use a mask when you render. So when we hit save and close, instead of having to go with a corner pin and, excuse me, we go to visible layers and make sure that we turn off our wall track. There we are. All right, so now when we go back to After Effects, we can apply our mats and we can go to render our insert cutout right here. Okay, and what's nice about that is I have it completely live in After Effects. I don't have to worry about you know, whether or not my surface tool lines up, or you know, whether or not my corner pin's going to offset anything. It's just right there into my host, right back to the timeline, and it renders with motion blur. So, and our motion blur is faster, and I want to talk a little bit about that with you guys. Ross, do we have any questions on this shot before I move on and talk about our new motion blur improvements?
Hey, Mary, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Hey, yeah, sorry, I'm just answering some questions. Yeah, no, just some general questions about tracking. Some people are asking more about the interface itself, which I'm just trying to answer via the chat. So I think we're good to go.
Perfect, wonderful. I'm going to move on then. So we talked a little bit about motion blur. So for those of you that have dealt with the Mocha plugin before, one of the things you'll know, and for those of you that don't, I'll tell you, one of the things you'll know is that when you are rendering motion blur inside of After Effects or anything as part of the plugin in Mocha, it used to be a little bit slower. Now it actually renders quite fast. So I'm going to go ahead and just render this in real time for you. You can see that we've applied our mat right here in Mocha, and you can see that our mask is right here. I'm going to show you a little bit later how we can apply our mats as multiple shapes, but just for this, the purpose of this, I want to show you that we're calculating motion blur. The way we do that is we apply motion blur right here in Edge Properties. Okay, we save and close. And then what we can do is we can apply our mat. We can even add a feather if we want to, but we apply our mat as part of a plugin, so we don't even have to deal with splines. When we hit render, you can see that it is rendering so much faster than it used to right here in our interface. Now, I am on a laptop. Now, I am on a beefy laptop, to be sure, but I am on a laptop, and that's how fast it's rendering. So pretty cool. And for those of you that are asking what the graphics card is, I believe it's the GTX 5000. All right, now what we can do is we can also export this as a spline. So let's talk a little bit about Roto inside of Mocha. So we'll talk about this shot a little bit, and then I'm going to show you how to do it. So what I've done with this shot, let me just turn that off. What I've done with this shot is I've rotoscoped this guy, and I've sort of made a generic sort of depth matte to make more smoke in this shot, because I like this flare, but I want this to have a much smokier vibe. So what I'm doing is I'm using a composite of BCC's particle illusion, and I'm adding smoke to the scene. But what I'm also doing is I made this depth matte to process how he's interacting with that smoke. And of course, because it's a depth matte, 0 is going to be furthest away, white is going to be closest to us. So I've just made a series of very simple ramps here using Roto. If I were doing this for like real stereo conversion or something like that, obviously this would be a lot more complicated. But because this is just a smoke depth matte, I can get away with a lot. All right. And you can also use some of the new Sapphire tools on this. There's a I want to say S Depth is one of the new plugins from Sapphire that you can start to use this sort of thing for. So let's go right back to our shot, and let's talk about how this works. You can see I'm using this as a Luma matte in order to get a sort of depth matte effect on this shot. All right. Now, to do this Roto, let's talk about some of our Roto tools. So for those of you that have used Mocha before, you know that Mocha is a planar tracker, and what it does is you can track an object and then you can correct roto shapes over time. I want you to notice in this shot that I have split this shot up what we call paper doll style. Okay, and let me just show you what those mattes look like and turn our surface tools off. Okay, so when I say paper doll style, what I mean is you can see that we've split this arm up into 2 pieces, but we kept this doll arm, so to speak. We kept this arm one shape. And the reason for that is this is one plane of data. And if you look here, these are 2 planes and they're moving separately from one another. Same thing for the legs. I have 1 leg and 2 legs. Okay. Depending on how complicated this shot is or how much he was moving, I might split this up into even more shapes. Sometimes I'll do stuff like rib cage, soft tissue for the stomach, and then pelvis too. You know, it just depends on what you're doing. This guy's wearing a hoodie and walking forward in the shot. So it's a little bit more simple as far as shape breakdown goes. So let's talk a little bit about how we make shapes, and we'll talk a little bit about our tools, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and turn our mats off, and I'm gonna turn these visually off. And let's talk about some of the new tools that we have. So we have had this area brush tool, but we added something called fill gaps to our area brush. And I wanna talk about that for a little bit. So let's say that we needed to track this bridge back here. Normally what I would do is I would take a shape and I would come in here and I would start making a big shape just like this. And then I'd come in here and have to cut all this out. And it's kind of tedious and, you know, a bit tedious actually. So, so what I would do for that is take a lot of time. I don't want to take a lot of time, so I could use something like the area brush tool and just do this. Okay, and then what's nice about this is it's very organic, okay? And so now when we hit quick mask, there's our new mask around our bridge. This is great for window panes, tracking the edges of objects, you know, doing things like phones and screens. Or if I needed to have a huge shape around it, I could come in here and take my, brush tool, and I could go ahead and just crank this fill gaps value up. What we can do now is we can make our brush a little bigger by either hitting, Control and clicking and dragging, or I can use the open brackets and close brackets. I'm just going to take open brackets here, and now we're going to, wasn't it fill gaps? Let's try that one more time. Fill gaps, very big. Thank you. Oops. Let's make that a little smaller. Oh, it's going to be that kind of day. All right, so now it fills all those gaps in for you. All right, and what's nice about this is, you know, this brush tool is pressure sensitive, so you can make all kinds of fun shapes.
Yeah,
Um,
the idea behind this area brush, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just jump in for a second, Mary,
Please
is so
do.
that it's really all about just speeding up your workflow, because a lot of times you just have a big tracking area, you just want to like really quickly, make a big tracking area. Or, there's a great video that you did on the 2020, when we first came out with the area brush, where like say you have a green screen with like tons of tracking marks, using the area brush, just go poke, 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 yeah, around the screen, and they're all, you're basically telling Mocha that all those track search areas are on the same layer. That could
Hmm.
be very powerful as well. So it's really all about speeding up your workflow.
Absolutely, and that's a good point to make. Um, so the other things that we've done to speed up your workflows. So already, right, Mocha cuts your roto time in half by cutting your keyframes down to about a third of what you would normally use. But we have this new tool, well, it's new in 2020, called the magnetic spline tool, and it just follows the edges of an object, and then when you need to freehand, you just click and draw. And you can end up very quickly with these very nice shapes. And you can even come into the detail area and you can take the detail down to take some of the points out. But what the nice thing about this is when you are using this magnetic spline tool, it really just snaps to the edges. And speaking of snapping, when you're tracking, and again, I recommend that you don't track perspective when you're doing human roto or animal roto. For buildings and stuff, do use perspective, but for organic roto, don't. Just because it can get too funky too fast. We're going to keep shear on, but you need to think of Mocha as it's your roto assistant, okay? It's not going to do a perfect job of sticking to the edges on its own. So what we have to do is, as the artist, we correct over time, and I can use my transform tools to get myself close, and then I can select my points, and I can use the Alt S and snap all these points to my edges just like this. So Alt S, snap, and then let's just grab these points up here, Alt S. All right, and notice how that snapped those edges for me. All right, same thing here. We can just come over here. I can bring it a little closer and go Alt S. Same here. We'll go here, Alt S. All right, and now Mocha is making my keyframes for me. So there is my lovely new roto shape based on just a couple of snapped edges and the tracking data. Okay, so what Mocha does is all of that blue line is what the work that Mocha has done, and those 3 green dots, that's the work that I have done. Okay, so that's how Mocha saves you time when you're rotoscoping. It gives you something to tween over the top of. And another cool thing about that is you can use this tool here called the Auto Stabilize tool, and that'll pin your shape into the middle of the shot. And that means that you can really immediately see where any problem areas are. So I can see that there's a problem area right here at the top and sides. So I'm going to just select those really quick. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit Alt S again and Alt S again. And what we'll end up with is we'll end up with a corrected shape. So very, very good. Now, the thing about this is principles of animation apply. So you want to look for where the object is the most different and then make a keyframe on that. So think squash and stretch, think bounce, look for where the shape is the most off, make a correction there, and then refine your little arcs of animation down. That's how you end up saving yourself time. What you never want to do is come here, make another keyframe, come here, make another keyframe. And again, because what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with that, I'm exaggerating so that you guys can see, but you'll end up with that jittering roto edge that nobody likes to see. Okay, so that is how you can end up saving yourself time with these tools. Now, we also have just the freehand tool. If you want to use it, it's right here, and you can just draw a shape really easily. It's like the brush tool, except for you're just dealing with a spline directly. Okay, and of course, we still have our X-splines and Beziers if you want to draw them by hand. What I really like about X-splines is that you just relax for a curve, you pull tight for a corner, and it's that easy. So it all depends on what your preferences are. All of those splines, all of those X-splines, and the splines that are created by the the quick mask brush tool and the magnetic tool and freehand tools are all like that. So you relax for curves, you pull tight for corners. It's really, really fast. Also, the X-spline tools in general work better with our tracking data so that you can correct shapes a lot quicker. We do have Beziers if you want to use them, and sometimes people do because they translate one-to-one into your host software. But the problem with Beziers, I find, is that when you want to correct Beziers, you have 2 handlebars to worry about. And that can get kind of frustrating because what you'll have to do is you can't really do like a multiple point correction because they don't end up moving the same way. So that can be a little bit more frustrating when you're rotoscoping. All right, so let's go ahead and delete that. And let's talk a little bit about how to get this data. I'll show you the keyframes really quick, and then we'll talk about how to get this data back into After Effects. Now you can see right here that I've made a little bit of an error with my roto shape, no problem. What we're gonna do is we're gonna come in and correct that. And it doesn't matter when we are correcting our roto shape, we can just correct it. And now that will be better over time, just like that. All right, so now when we hit save and close, we can save this and close it. And back inside of Mocha, we can apply this data in a couple of different ways. So we can take our our matte data, and we can either do apply matte, okay, which as you can see, we'll just apply the matte to the object, and we can add motion blur to that or whatever. Or what we can do is we can hit create AE masks, or we can copy and paste it out of Mocha Pro, like some of our old veteran users are, I don't want to say old's not the right term, our experienced veteran users can just be used to doing with the workflow where you go to export roto shapes, then you go to select all layers, and you copy and you paste. But what we're going to do is we're going to create AE masks right here instead of After Effects, and it will create those masks for me right here in After Effects, and you can see I have access to them right here. What's nice about having Mocha do that for you is that there's no errors. So when you copy and paste data, you got to make sure you're on the first frame or it won't work. When you're doing this inside of the Mocha plugin, Mocha takes the guesswork out for you and does it automatically. So
Hey Mary, can I jump in with a
yes,
couple of questions? Because I know you're right now that you're talking about getting the mask, out of Mocha to your host.
of
Might be good
course.
to answer a couple of questions. Someone was asking about the edge feathering, and
Hmm.
when maybe we should just clarify, like if you wanted to get your edge feathering from
Hmm.
Mocha into After Effects, for example, you're only going to get that when you view the mat or the apply the mat. When you
Yep,
convert your shapes, the edge feathering, when you convert to like the native host, it's not going to translate over to After Effects.
that is true. So let me just show you an example of that. So if we take, this edge and pull this out over here, just so you can see what the mat is doing, and then we go ahead and hit save and close. And we come in here and we hit apply matte. You can see our feather is going to be right here. If we go ahead and we hit create AE masks, let's go ahead and show you the difference whenever After Effects is done calculating it. A lot of data to convert. So what it's going to do is, as Ross says, you're not going to have that line there anymore of soft edge. What you're going to have is just the hard edge again. So that is the difference, and there it is visualized for you. So you can see that if you've done a lot of edge feathering, like per point edge feathering, your better choice is going to be going ahead and using the apply mat. And again, that is a faster render now, so it should be a lot easier for you to use that if you have a ton of per point feathering. And you can even, on top of that per point feathering, you can go ahead and add motion blur so that you can, have Mocha do a little bit more of the work for you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Mary. That answers that person's question. Just a couple other things. One thing is that your Mocha layers will actually, when you do convert to AE layers, the naming actually comes across, which is very nice. For large roto
Yes.
projects. Maybe when you talk about your next example, someone was just asking about grouping layers, and there's so many things that we've added over the years that I think people just miss sometimes. So just grouping layers in the Mocha interface.
It's just that easy.
Yeah, so just right click there
So just,
or under the pull down. Yeah.
yep, just select your layers and you can go ahead and click folder, and then you can add a folder. The folders don't come in to After Effects, for example.
Right.
Another thing that doesn't come into After Effects that I just want to point out for users is, let's say that I'm tracking an object that goes off screen. Okay, what you're going to want to do is you're going to make your keyframe. Excuse me, let me go ahead and go back to pick both. You want to make your keyframe, okay, and then you want to go to the next frame and just drag it off screen. Now you can also trim your layer right here in your layer properties. Don't do it down here because this is actually the interface. But if you drag it off screen, no matter what host you go into, it will respect the on and off of that shape. But also it allows you to use your shape later down the line, because a lot of folks have asked me, like, okay, so how do I trim my layer for this section and then go 20 frames down and then trim my layer for that section? The answer is you don't. Okay, what you do is you animate your shapes on and off frame, and then they will work no matter what in all hosts, because what After Effects will try to do is it will not respect that data because it tries to create its own spline data. And one of the things that doesn't come in on that spline data, even though names do, is your trimmed in and out points right here in layer properties. So when you're animating, if you got a lot of shapes coming on and off screen, like go ahead and literally move them on and off screen, and it will save you a ton of time. So that's a Roto tip that we can cover while we're talking. All right, moving right along, let's talk a little bit about mega plates. Is that it? Are we done with Roto questions, or is Ross muted? Perhaps.
Yeah, I'm still
Okay,
here. Sorry, I was muted. It happens, happens 20 times during one of these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone was just asking about the paste Mocha mask option, and just to be clear that we did remove the copy and paste functions from the Mocha AE, which is bundled free, but Mocha Pro still has copy and paste. So absolutely, you can still paste Mocha mask. If you're in Mocha Pro and you select a layer and set copy, go to export shape like Mary's showing, and does the Mocha shape for AE and hits copy, you can go back to After Effects and paste the Mocha mask. That is still an option, although it's kind of a dated option, because when you hit the apply mask inside the plugin, like Mary was showing earlier, that's really doing the same thing. So my feeling is that the apply Mocha mask actually takes precedent, or is just sort of like the new update.
Speaking
And
of new
that's some
updates,
fun stuff. There you go, Mary.
speaking of new updates, After Effects has decided that it did not like that, and I don't know why, but we'll figure it out later after the webinar. So I don't know why.
While that's happening, I think it was in the last release, or maybe it was in a point release, that we did update the autosave preferences, which is actually kind of cool. Which is, when we crash, it's a good time to mention that there's actually in Mocha Pro and in Mocha AE, under the file preferences, you can set how often your system autosaves. So if you are experiencing crashes, that's a nice thing that you can do autosaves more frequently, and then you can also manually save as well to file. So I'll get off your space and let you go for it, Mary.
That's okay. Whoopsie daisy, as they say. Again, I am on a laptop, so we'll just chalk it up to that right now. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about is mega plates. Okay, so normally, if I were going to do like a background replacement or matte painting on this shot, I would have to create a long mega plate, or a long plate on my own manually, and then have my tracking data added, and then hope everything lined up. What we can do actually is we can track this shot, and again, just so you guys, let's just refresh here. This is where the track is looking, right here, okay? And the surface tool is what the track is doing. All right, so the surface tool, you'll see, is moving based on my track. All right, so what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna reopen this really quick because I hit align surface, and I didn't want to do that because the align surface has to be on a different frame. Anyway, the point is we this is our tracking data, and that is our shape. With our background here, what we can do is we can align our surface on a certain frame, and that's going to be the frame that we create our mega plate from. And what Mocha will do is Mocha will actually generate a plate for me based on the track. And this is a really erratic shot. It's moving really quickly. There's a lot of motion blur. There's not a ton of texture to track. We've got this car moving over most of the texture that we could track with dust. So what we do is we draw a roto shape around our car and all of the dust, guys, and notice how all of the shadows are also contained inside of this large shape. That's because anytime you ask Mocha to do something, it does exactly what you tell it to do. So if I'd made a really tight shape around this car, it would say, okay, ignore the car, but I'll go ahead and track all this dust and shadows for you because that's what you asked me to do, right? It's like, no, Mocha, that's not what I want you to do. So we want to track the rest of the areas. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this data and we're going to link a background track to that. So right here, we go to link to track. And we say link to track layer 5. Let me just call this BG track so that it's more clear. So we're going to take our BG and link it to BG track because, we want to make sure we name our layers so that it's not layer 5, layer 45, and layer 95 so that our coworkers don't, get irate with us. And then what we're going to do is we're going to link that to our layer background track. Okay, and now we have a large shape that we can start to adjust. So what I've done here is I've drawn a much larger shape around this car, and I've used the Uber key when I need to adjust the shape. So if I need to adjust that shape, I can. And because I used the Uber key, that shape is offset over the entire timeline. So I'm not changing keyframes. This is important because this shape is how I'm going to define what my mega plate is. So let's go to frame. I want to say it's 81. Yep, that's where I did my align surface. And you can see I have this massive shape that I want to fill in with this motion that the car is doing. And I want to go ahead and go to mega plates. And then I'm going to hit render. And this is GPU accelerated. So it's going to think about it up here in the corner. And then what it's going to do is it's going to spit me out a mega plate based on my tracking data. Now, it does take it a couple of seconds to do because it's doing a lot of calculations and they're based on the remove module. So what it does is it replaces all those pixels pixel by pixel based on the track. So there's my huge long mega plate. Okay. Now where it's black is where it didn't have enough information to replace anything because the car moved over that section. We can get to our car now and we can say, hey, remove foreground, and it'll take the car right out of my mega plate. So now I can take this mega plate and I can start to paint it. And that gives me a really good reference for where everything is in my shot to create a much nicer matte painting. So I'm gonna, I can actually take my tracking data. In this case, I can export my tracking data right as a copy and paste, or I can apply it right in our plugin like we showed you earlier. But let's go ahead and save and close this. And back inside of After Effects, I can create a really long mega plate. So here's my mega plate. Excuse me. There's my original plate. Excuse me. See if we can see this. There's my original mega plate. And what we've done is we just paint this a little bit. And I can also paint this inside a silhouette. So I can further just take this, this PSD and I can come over here into Silhouette Paint, which is a new plugin that we just released. And actually, I can actually open this up and start painting on the shot as well. So if I need to, I can create a project in my results folder, and then I can actually just go ahead and start painting this. So if I wanted, I could make any sort of color I want in my, or I could start to, paint my clouds a little bit. Let me just find where my tool went. There we go, because it's really small. There we are. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see. And you can see we could start, I'll just start painting some white in here. We can start. Now, obviously that's a little bit too bright. So let's come in here and let's take our opacity down a bit. And we can start to, paint some brighter highlights here in the clouds. Just like this.
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking us, Mary, since Silhouette, as you paint, I'll just talk a little bit. A lot of people have been asking, about Silhouette Paint because it's, they're asking what's the difference between Silhouette Paint and Mocha, because Silhouette even Silhouette Paint and Full Silhouette both have Mocha tracking inside it. But I would just basically point to the paint tools as that, Mocha does not currently have any paint tools And if you're using it for a matte painting, like Mary's kind of showing, it's a great complement, especially to this mega plate workflow. Or if you use
Yep.
Mocha Pro for object removals and you need to paint clean plates, it's also a great solution because you don't have to kick your frames out to a paint application like after Photoshop. You could be doing your paint right in your host.
Yeah, exactly. Now I did some of this paint in Photoshop just because, like, it doesn't have content aware fill, for example. But like, yes, it's a brilliant tool to use for when you need to paint using the clone and paint tools. And also, there's a tool in here I really love, guys, and I'm going to show you in another example called the blemish brush. And this is basically like a video heal tool, and it rocks. Okay, it is a blur plus grain brush, so I guess we'd call that a glur brush. Anyway, the point is that if you match the grain of the shot, it comes in and hides all of your sins beautifully. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. So this is our quick and dirty paint here. We're going to save this and close it. And then right here, it's applied inside of our shot. And we can say hold frame. And what that'll do is that'll hold that for the entire shot. And now when we go back into our project and we go back into our, this shot, what you'll see is you can see that our paint is applied right here instead of our shot. So let's find, that's a good section right here. So you can see that there's my new silhouette paint where my clouds are. Okay, so here's the original and here's my new paint back over the top. Now, if I wanted to do a beautiful shot, obviously I would come in here and I would add a lot more detail by hand and paint a beautiful painting. But since this is, a very fast shot, I'm not going to worry too much about that detail. And so what you end up with is a shot that has some nice cloud detail where it didn't have cloud detail before. Okay, and that's with our large matte painting. So it's pretty handy. That is one workflow. You can also use it for things that aren't sky. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'll just show you. So this shot, and again, this is another one of those perspective shift doesn't matter shots. And in the past, this would have been a lot trickier to do. But what you can do is you can make your mega plate, and I'm just going to show you what that ends up looking like because I already showed you the workflow. You can make your mega plate and you can start to do things like, composite over the top of them. But what's nice about this is you can go into your mega plate and you can paint on your plate. So what we've done here, I'm just going to show you, is we've painted out. I'll just zoom in because I think it's really hard to see without zooming in. You can paint these tire tracks out using the blemish brush and some texture paint. So let's open this and show you really quickly a little bit of that. Go, baby, go. You can do it. I believe in you. I think my computer is getting too hot. I have to put a fan on it, I think. All right. So
I think you still have the silhouette launched too, maybe.
Maybe. I don't think so because I'm pretty sure I closed it. But let's just go ahead and close it anyway. And let's open it one more time and see what it does for me. There we go. All right, so what we can do is we can come over here to our blemish brush right here. And we can start to zoom into our shot a little bit using the plus and minus tools. And the nice thing about the blemish brush is you can come in here and you can actually match your grain. So if you look at your grain, you can start to look at it by channel. And you can match your grain right here in these tools. But what I'm going to do is this grain is already pretty much matched. So I'm going to just start using my blemish tool to start filling in this detail, just like this. And then the nice thing is I can come over here and I can take my clone tool and I can come over to my detail layers. And now I can start to clone in just the detail back over my blur area.
Yeah, Silhouette Paint has some amazing features for these kind of touch-ups. The detail or fill painting.
Yeah, so that's basically how I did that shot. I'm not going to save it because I don't want you to I don't want to save that data, but I do want to point out that you can do a lot to get rid of problem areas in your shot using silhouette paint. And so then you can start to composite this back into the shot using that same technique that I had showed with our mega plates. And I'll show you exactly how that data gets back in. So I had mentioned that we have the CC power pin. So the nice thing about the CC power pin is that you can just apply it as either a corner pin or a power pin, and you can actually go ahead and just copy and paste your data right out of Mocha. So in this case, what we've done is we've applied our data. We've generated our tracking data by selecting the track that we want, our mega plate track, and then we've hit apply export by CC power pin or corner pin onto our paint mega plate pre-comp. Okay, and what that does is you can see that we've also done it. Let's just toggle switches here for a second. You can see that we've also used this setting right here, and this is really important. One of the things that we've done when we made our pre-comp to begin with is we went layer, pre-compose, and we actually left all our attributes in the composition. Now that is not normal for the workflow in Mocha. Usually when you do a corner pin, you want to move all the attributes in the new composition. For this, I want to leave all of the attributes in the new composition. That's going to keep my size for me. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to check this button here. What this button is this is collapse transformations, okay? And what collapse transformations does is it continuously rasterizes your image so that it doesn't shrink your image or size up your image and lose resolution. And that can be really, really important. So let's just go ahead and fit this back. Yep, and now let's go ahead and show our render. And what we'll do is we'll show you what this looks like final. So now we've got our new background with our mega plate. Even though this is shifting a lot in perspective, we've gotten rid of our tire tracks and we've added some text at the top, which, you know, everybody knows how to add text, so I'm not going to go into that, but made a new text layer. I put a bevel on it. I overlaid it onto the ground. Ta-da. All right, guys, that is mega plates, and they're pretty cool. You can do a lot of stuff with them. You can do a lot of set extensions, a lot of matte paintings. You can, correct a lot of mistakes in your plate. You can start to do things like one of the popular requests we get a lot is adding real estate lines to drone shots, for example. You can start using it for things like that. There's a lot of cool tools a lot of cool shots that you can use mega plates for. And it takes a much more tedious process that you used to have to do by hand. It makes it a lot simpler. And with our GPU acceleration, it is killer. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about are removes, okay? So removes are kind of like the holy grail of computer vision, right? So what we want to do is, let's say we want to take this dog and we want to take him out of the shot and we want to replace him with a CG alien dog or something, I don't know, it could be like 3 Below or something. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this dog out of our shot in order to put a new element into our shot. Now this is actually kind of tricky. And if we try to do something like ask Adobe to do a content aware fill on this, Adobe's content aware fill is really good when it works. And when it doesn't, it gives you kind of strange results, okay? And part of that is because Adobe Content Aware Fill is really, really good for filling in the background on objects that can be 3D solved and are medium to small. When it takes up a large portion of the screen, it has a little bit more trouble with it, and you don't have a lot of room to troubleshoot right now with the way it is. Now, it's a great tool. I am not knocking it. We used a Mocha Roto shape to try to fill this. Like, don't think that I'm knocking the tool. It's just there's some things it doesn't work on. Okay, and just like there's some things Mocha doesn't work on. Mocha needs planar data. Now, normally I would say that this background is too complicated to remove over. However, it's a pan, and this is actually moving in a pretty linear way with not a lot of parallax. Okay, so we can get away with doing a remove on this. If there was a ton of parallax, we would not be able to do that. So because Mocha is a planar tracker, it removes over planes. If you think in terms of planar data, then your remove will work for you. If you have a ton of hard shadows and crazy organic textures moving behind the object, you're not going to get as good of a remove. And that's part of using Mocha successfully, is knowing when Mocha is going to nail it and when Mocha's not. The mistake that a lot of people make with removes is they think that removes are magic. They are not, okay? They're based on tracks. And so let's talk about those tracks. I'm going to launch Mocha here. And I want to show you how I've set this remove up. All right, so the first thing I've done, obviously, is I've drawn a huge shape all around my dog. Let me turn my surface tools off here. So you can see this huge shape around my dog. Now, why did I do a huge shape? Well, because if I try to do a tight roto, again, I'm going to leave motion blur on the background. I'm going to leave shadows. I might leave part of his tail or flops of his ears or bits of his toes on the background. And that's just going to happen if you use tight roto. For removes, you want loose roto around the object you're trying to remove. And you want to make sure that you grab all motion blur and all shadows on the object that you're trying to remove inside of that shape. Otherwise, Mocha is going to think that's part of the background. The next thing I did is we tracked this background. And again, I'll turn the surface tool on so you can see what this track looks like. We tracked this whole top background area. Next, we tracked this bottom area. And I'm not going to make you sit through this track, but you can see that I've made another shape. And again, this sort of perspective shift that would normally give Mocha a little bit of a hard time, not really a problem anymore because of the way we've changed our algorithm. All right, so there's our bottom track. Now, I'm just going to actually put this up here so you can see what it tracked. Okay, all of that. All right, so the white is where the track is looking. The surface tool is what the track is doing. What we also did is we used our link layers tool right here, and I linked these two shapes together. Okay, so what that does is that connects these two layers so that there's not a gap between them when we do our remove. All right, so now here's my dog, there's my background layers. Okay, and we're going to jump over to our remove, and we're going to say, hey, remove this dog. Let me turn my overlays off so this looks extra impressive. And we're going to just say, remove this dog. And it's going to take him out based on my roto shape and my tracks. And we're going to hit save and close. And we're going to render this back to the timeline by checking our render checkbox and our remove dropdown. And so now we have our dog.
Very nice, Mary.
Removed from our shot. So it's a pretty good remove. Like there might be some touch-ups that I have to do, like here towards the middle. And that's because of lighting changes, you know, and I could always try to use the, interpolate or linear illumination modeling to try to solve that. But in this case, it does a really nice remove right over our dog area, and we can start to put our objects back in the top.
Yeah, I love that you showed.
About
I love that you showed, content aware, and so this is a great example of, content aware. Like you say, it's quite good for some very simple removes, but there's plenty of shots that we all know that no software is magic, and so showing an example like this is very, very useful.
Yeah, it's and again, it's not perfect. There's some stuff I would need to touch up a little bit and blend some lighting together and add some feathering, but I'm really happy with this as a remove, and I think it's important to show people that no matter how good a tool is, there's still some finessing you're going to have to do. Every time. And
absolutely, especially from our perspective, because people for many years, they always send us their most difficult shots, right? And they're, at the end of the day, an effects artist still needs to know how to fix a shot manually, because there's lots of times that, these automatic tools might get you 80–90% there, but knowing how to paint, to roto, to track, to stabilize, and do manual corrections is just such an important task.
Absolutely. And if I did want to say adjust our lighting a little bit, we could come down here into our remove modeling and we could start doing interpolate lighting. And so now when I do my remove, it's going to try to blend my shot so that lighting looks a little bit better over time.
So, yeah, we even have some cool tricks where you could save that as a clean plate, and then that would even speed up your render. So I know a lot of people who use Mocha for 360, they'll do techniques like that. They might step through their shot, render some of these clean plates to disk, and then they're basically automatically linked back in, and that will really speed up their renders.
Yep. So if you look now, we have some, if we hit create clean plate, save it again, you can now see that we've got 2 clean plates that we can start to use to try to clean this up a little bit. And again, we could do that here. Again, with our, let's go back to interpolate here and render. All right, so now if we go ahead and hit create clean plate and save that, and now if we render back through the shot using clean plates exclusively, what we can end up with is a little bit prettier lighting solutions too.
And this, for users who've been with us for a long time, they know that remove was always very powerful, but it was slow, right, back in the day. And we did optimize it to run on GPU, and as the faster cards keep coming out, your removes will just get that much faster.
Yep. And see, here's the thing too that I want to point out. You know, we're when we use interpolate, the background here looks really good, and the foreground, where these colors are really close to one another, it looks a little shifty. So what I can do is I can split my remove into 2 pieces. I can use linear for the ground, interpolate for the background, and blend those 2 together. So you're not stuck with just, you know, if it's not looking like perfect, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to try to correct any of those problems over time, and then you can composite those sorts of passes together, and it's still so much faster than hand painting this. Oh my gosh, you know, I don't know, for those of you that don't know, like my background is in a lot of roto paint, beauty work, matte paintings, and the kinds of tasks that are really tedious artistic tasks. And this Mocha, you know, it gets you about 80 to 90% there on most shots, 100% there on some shots, you know, and that is just a lifesaver when you are staring down the barrel of a, you know, deadline. So
Yeah, it's true, and I think sometimes people might jump in and try out the remove on a really, really difficult shot, and that's their very first time they've ever used Mocha, and they say, oh, it doesn't work the way I think it's going to work, and they kind of drop it, they never come back to it. But I think that if you take the time to actually sort of learn the workflow for the removes, again, you know, it might not fix your shot 100%, but you are literally going to save yourself time.
absolutely. And that's another reason why I kind of like showing the shot. This is a real complex remove, y'all. This is not an easy remove. This is not the kind of thing that you would normally look at and say, hey, Mocha can do a great remove on this shot. And that's because all of these background pieces are not necessarily coplanar, but because it's a pan, we get away with it. And,
Yep.
you know, sometimes the name of the game is getting away with it.